The forest burned. Smoke choked the air between blackened pines, ash drifting like snow over ground still warm from the flames. Senlin village huddled at the forest's edge, its wooden structures half collapsed. Families fleeing with whatever they could carry. Children wailed. Adults shouted directions that no one followed. Panic had dissolved order into pure survival instinct. Then, at dusk, the spirit came. It emerged from the tree line like smoke given form, massive, impossible to focus on directly. The villagers who saw it clearly enough described a creature part bear, part something older. Gray-white fur shifted with patterns that hurt to perceive. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence and rage in equal measure. High by, the forest guardian, the one the old stories warned never to anger. It moved through Senlin with terrible purpose, smashing walls, overturning carts. When it touched a person, they simply vanished, not killed but taken somewhere else. Somewhere the living couldn't follow. 3 disappeared in the first minute, 5 more as families scattered into the darkness. Then the sky tore open. Not metaphorically. Reality split with a sound like breaking glass, a wound in the air itself that pulsed with colors no eye should witness. Energy crackled along the edges, not lightning, but something that made lightning seem tame by comparison. Brother Sergeant Kyle Mantius of the Salamanders fell through the rift. He hit the ground hard enough to crater the Earth servo motors in his power armor, absorbing impact that would have liquefied an unaugmented human. Tactical systems came online immediately. His helmet's heads-up display painted the world in thermal overlays and threat assessments cataloging his surroundings with machine precision. Structural instability high. Civilian casualties probable. Hostile presence confirmed. He stood 2.5 meters tall, in full Salamander's marked-in-hand armor, charcoal black, with flame-red detailing along the vents, drake head embossed on his left pauldron. Purity seals hung from his chest plate, sacred oaths written on parchment that fluttered in the smoke-laden wind. His bolter came up smoothly, targeting reticle tracking movement through the haze. The spirit, his sensors classified it as unknown entity biological readings. Inconclusive, turned toward him. Even through his helmet's filters, Kyle felt something primal recoil. This wasn't a Xenos threat. Wasn't a demon manifestation. His tactical training had no classification for what he was seeing. The creature charged. Kyle's finger moved to the trigger. Threat elimination protocol initiated. The bolt gun's muzzle tracked center mass. One squeeze would send an explosive round punching through. A blast of wind hit him from the side. Not natural wind. Directed, controlled. Strong enough to shift his aim by crucial degrees. The bolt round discharged anyway, screaming past high by to detonate against a pine trunk. Wood exploded into splinters. The spirit flinched, but didn't stop its advance. Wait. The voice came from above, young urgent, carrying an authority that seemed at odds with its owner. Kyle's helmet turned upward. A massive flying creature descended 6-legged and covered in shaggy white fur. Not a threat, his tactical assessment determined after a microsecond scan. Transportation. Mount. 3 figures dropped from the creature's saddle with practiced ease. The first was a boy, no young teenager, head shaved, except for blue arrow tattoos that ran from forehead to spine. Yellow and orange robes marked him as belonging to some local order. No visible weapons. Threat level minimal. Except the wind that had deflected Kyle's shot had come from this child. The second figure was female, dark hair tied back, wearing blue and white garments that suggested tribal affiliation. She carried no firearm, but water from a nearby stream lifted at her gesture, coiling around her arms like liquid serpents. The third was male, similar age to the girl, holding what appeared to be a primitive throwing weapon. His posture suggested combat training, despite the crude equipment. "Don't shoot it!" the bald boy shouted, already moving between Kyle and the spirit. "Heibai isn't evil, it's in pain." Kyle's tactical processors ran threat assessment updates. The boy's positioning was tactically unsound, exposing himself to both Kyle's firing line and the entity's attack radius. Amateur, reckless, or protecting civilians despite personal risk. "Civilians secured." Kyle's voice emerged from his helmet's Vox grill like grinding stone. "Hostile presence confirmed. Recommend immediate evacuation." The boy's gray eyes widened as he took in Kyle's full appearance. The towering armored form, the weapon that looked more like artillery than a rifle, the brutal efficiency of every movement. "Who are you supposed to be?" the male with the throwing weapon muttered. "The world's angriest teapot." Kyle's helmet tilted fractionally toward the speaker. Irrelevant. The spirit was the priority threat. It had stopped its charge attention split between Kyle and the bald boy now standing in no man's land. "Aang, get back." The girl's voice carried genuine fear. Not of the spirit, of Kyle. So, Aang was the boy's designation, noted. "It's okay, Katara." Aang's hands rose in a placating gesture directed at the spirit, not at Kyle. "Heibai, I know you're hurting. The forest is burning. Your home is being destroyed. But taking the villagers won't stop the flames." The spirit's growl resonated in frequencies that Kyle's audio filters struggled to process. It took a step toward Aang. Kyle's targeting reticle locked on automatically. "Lower your weapon." Katara's command was sharp. Water still coiled around her forearms, ready to be weaponized. "You'll make it worse." "Threat assessment indicates entity is hostile," Kyle replied. "Mission parameter protect civilians. Entity has demonstrated lethal intent." "It's not lethal," Aang insisted. "It's confused angry. If we just—" The spirit lunged. Kyle moved on pure reflex, not firing but intercepting. He crashed into Heibai with the full weight of his armor, one ceramite gauntlet catching what might have been a forelimb. The impact sent shockwaves through both combatants. Kyle's boots tore furrows in the earth as he was driven backward, servo motors straining. Up close, the entity's nature defied comprehension. Solid matter that wasn't entirely solid. Physical presence that seemed to occupy more space than its body suggested. Acidic drool. No, not acid. Something else splattered across his chest plate, scoring the paint, but not penetrating. "Aang now," the boy with the boomerang shouted. Aang closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the boy's eyes snapped open, but wrong. They glowed white, pure and blazing. Wind erupted from nowhere and everywhere at once. A cyclone that caught Heibai and pulled it away from Kyle with irresistible force. Kyle's sensors screamed warnings. Energy spike detected. Classification unknown. Power source undefined. The glowing-eyed boy rose into the air on columns of wind, his body language shifting from frightened teenager to something ancient and vast. When he spoke, his voice carried overtones that suggested multiple speakers in harmony. "Heibai, I understand your pain. Let me help." And just like that, the boy Aang vanished. Not physically. His body remained suspended in the tornado of his own creation. But something essential had departed, leaving only a shell maintained by whatever impossible force he commanded. Katara moved to stand beneath the floating form water, still ready. "He's in the spirit world. We need to keep Heibai calm until he returns." The male raised his boomerang. "And keep Angry Metal Man from shooting everything." Kael's targeting systems tracked both teenagers and the spirit in constant recalculation. None of this aligned with any doctrine in his training. Spirits. Energy manipulation without technological interface. A boy who could apparently exist in two places simultaneously. 300 meters to the south, his armor's external sensors detected movement. Multiple contacts, organized formation. Kael's helmet swiveled toward the new threat. Through the smoke, figures emerged wearing crimson armor marked with flame motifs. They carried primitive but effective-looking weapon spears tipped with fire crossbows blades that gleamed even in the dim light. Fire Nation soldiers. And behind them, barely visible through the haze, something else. A structure that shouldn't exist in this technological context. Metal pylons arranged in geometric patterns, machinery that pulsed with energy similar to but distinct from what he'd felt when the rift had opened. An altar. A resonance device. Someone here was manipulating spatial anomalies. Someone had the technology to tear holes in reality. Someone had opened the door through which Kael had fallen. The closest Fire Nation soldiers spotted the standoff, massive armored figure, water-wielding girl, floating boy surrounded by a spirit that radiated wrongness. The soldier's hand went to his weapon. Kael's bolter tracked the movement with mechanical precision. 3 threats now. The spirit, the soldiers, and whatever had built that altar. Duty demanded threat elimination. Mission protocols were clear. But as Kael watched the young girl position herself to defend both the unconscious boy and the civilians huddled in the ruined village, he recognized something his conditioning hadn't entirely erased. Salamanders' doctrine. Protect the weak. Preserve civilian life. These people, whatever else they were trying to save their village. Kael's bolter lowered, not holstered, but angled toward the ground. Maintain position, he transmitted to the girl. Keep civilians clear of the entity. I will address the armed hostiles. Katara stared at him, water still coiled and ready. You're helping us. Mission parameter, Kael stated. Protect civilians. He turned toward the approaching Fire Nation soldiers, servo motors humming as he shifted into combat stance. The altar in the distance pulsed once, sending ripples through the air that made his armor's sensors spike with warnings. This world made no sense. Nothing here aligned with Imperium doctrine or Xenos threat classifications. But one thing remained constant across all battlefields, all wars, all realities. Civilians needed protection. And Brother Sergeant Kael Mantius knew his duty. The spirit world existed between heartbeats. Aang felt himself pulled through layers of reality that shouldn't have dimension, but did. Sound became color. Light took on weight. His body remained suspended above the burning forest, but his consciousness, his true self, walked paths carved from memory and emotion. Here the forest stood whole. Trees stretched upward in impossible configurations, their trunks wider than houses, bark gleaming with bioluminescence. No smoke, no flames, just the pure essence of what this place had been before fire and war had scarred it into ruin. Hai Bai waited at the center. The spirit's form shifted constantly. Bear becoming tree, becoming wind, becoming something with too many teeth and not enough logic. But beneath the rage and confusion, Aang sensed the core truth. Pain. Loss. The forest's suffering made manifest. I see you, Aang said softly. His voice carried differently here, resonating through the spiritual substrate like ripples on water. Your home is burning. The ones you protected are fleeing. You feel betrayed. The spirit's growl rattled through dimensions Aang couldn't name. Images flooded his mind, centuries of guardianship, watching saplings grow into giant seasons, cycling in patterns older than written history. Then fire, axes, machines that bellowed smoke and tore living wood into dead timber. I can't undo what's been done, Aang continued, stepping closer. The spirit could destroy him here with a thought. In the spirit world, physical laws bent to emotional truths. But I can help you understand. The people you took, they're not the ones who burned your forest. Hai Bai lunged. Not physically. The attack came as pure concept grief weaponized, moss given teeth. Aang felt it crash against his own memories, the air nomad genocide waking from ice to find everyone he'd known turned to dust and bones. The weight of being the last. The guilt of surviving when an entire nation hadn't. Yes, Aang whispered, tears streaming down his face in both worlds. I know. The spirit paused. For the first time since entering this realm, Aang saw past the rage to the being beneath. Ancient. Tired. Afraid of what fire would leave behind, not just ash, but emptiness. A world where forests became memory instead of living presence. Aang reached out one hand. Let them go. The villages. They're scared too. Everyone in this war is scared. The spirit's form stabilized slightly. Bare. Just bare. Gray-white fur matted with spiritual residue from the boundary between worlds. Its eyes met Aang's, and understanding passed between them, without words. The missing villagers appeared in the space between one breath and the next, confused but alive. Hai Bai lowered its massive head. Thank you, Aang said. When the war ends, I'll come back. We'll plant new trees. I promise. He pulled himself back toward the physical realm, the spirit world releasing him with reluctance. Reality snapped into focus with jarring abruptness. Katara's worried face hovered below him, water still coiled defensively. Beyond her, Sokka stood with boomerang raised. And further out, the massive armored warrior faced down a squad of Fire Nation soldiers with the calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Aang descended on cushions of air, his eyes fading from glowing white back to normal gray. It's done. Hai Bai released them. The villagers materialized around them, 8 people who'd vanished into spiritual abduction, now blinking in confusion as they tried to process their return. An elderly woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing. 2 children clung to their mother. We need to move, Sokka said sharply. Fire Nation incoming. The armored warrior Kael Katara had called him stood like a wall of black ceramite and flame-red accents between the civilians and the approaching soldiers. His weapon remained lowered, but ready tracking movements with mechanical precision that made Aang's stomach tighten. 10 Fire Nation soldiers advanced in formation, their red armor polished despite the soot-filled air. The lead soldier carried herself with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. When she spoke, her voice cut through the ambient chaos. Identify yourselves. This sector is under Fire Nation jurisdiction during active military operations. Jurisdiction denied, Kael replied. His voice through the helmet carried no emotion, just flat statement of fact. Civilian population requires evacuation. Withdraw your forces to allow safe passage. The soldier's eyes narrowed. You're not Earth Kingdom, not Water Tribe. What are you? Irrelevant. I disagree. The soldier's hand drifted toward the fire lance strapped to her back. Unknown military assets operating in combat zones represent potential threats to Fire Nation security. Surrender and submit to questioning or be classified as hostile. Kael's helmet tilted fractionally. Analyzing. Calculating. Aang had seen that kind of mechanical assessment before enemy commanders, deciding whether to attack or retreat based on pure tactical mathematics. "Katara," Aang murmured. "We need to de-escalate." "Tell that to Metal Man," she whispered back. "He looks ready to fight a small army." She wasn't wrong. Everything about Kael's stance communicated readiness for violence, controlled efficient violence that would end threats with minimal expenditure of resources. Aang had seen Fire Nation soldiers with that same bearing. The difference was scale. Kael moved like he expected to win. "Stand down," the Fire Nation soldier commanded. Her squad spread into flanking positions, fire lances coming up to ready positions. "Final warning." Kael's response came in two parts. First, his bolter snapped up with hydraulic speed, targeting reticle painting the lead soldier's center mass. The movement was so fast that by the time the Fire Nation squad registered the threat, they were already in his sights. Second, he fired not at them, but above them. The bolt rounds screamed through the air like a miniature comet explosive payload detonating 30 meters overhead. The blast wave knocked several soldiers off their feet. Debris rained down. When the smoke cleared, a crater marked the earth where Kael's warning shot had impacted. "Next one finds flesh," Kael stated calmly. "Withdraw." The Fire Nation soldiers scrambled backward formation, breaking under the psychological pressure of a weapon none of them could classify or counter. Within seconds, they'd retreated beyond the tree line, leaving only churned earth and the lingering smell of propellant. Silence settled over the clearing. Sokka broke it first. "Okay, that was terrifying, but also kind of awesome. I'm conflicted." Kael's helmet swiveled toward Aang. "Status of the entity. Hai Bai's calm now," Aang said carefully. "The spirit won't attack again." Confirmed by tactical observation. Kael's sensors had apparently tracked Hai Bai's retreat into the deeper forest. Civilian casualties 0. Mission parameters satisfied. Mission. Katara's water uncoiled slowly, returning to the stream. "You keep saying that. What exactly is your mission?" "Survival, intelligence gathering, identification of anomaly source." Kael's helmet turned toward the south, where the altar pulsed with barely visible energy. "That structure, explain its purpose." Aang exchanged glances with Katara and Sokka. None of them had seen the device before. "We don't know." "Fire Nation technology, probably. They've been experimenting with..." He trailed off, watching Kael's armored form, tense in recognition. "Spatial resonance," Kael finished. "Reality manipulation. Someone is attempting to weaponize dimensional rifts." "Weaponize?" Sokka's eyes widened. "As in, tear holes in the world on purpose." "Confirmed." Kael's voice carried a weight. Aang recognized the sound of someone who'd seen war crimes dressed up as military necessity. "The rift through which I entered this reality was not natural. It was forced, deliberately created." Katara's hands balled into fists. "Then we destroy it." "Negative." Kael's helmet swung back toward her. "Premature destruction of active resonance devices can cause cascade failures. Uncontrolled spatial collapse. Casualties catastrophic." "So what do we do?" Aang asked. Kael was silent for 3 full seconds, an eternity for someone who processed tactical data at machine speed. When he spoke, something in his tone had shifted. Not softer, but considering. "Intel suggests the device requires specific conditions to maintain stability. Astronomical alignment, energy source, control mechanisms." He paused. "Your capabilities, the elemental manipulation. Could they disrupt the resonance without triggering collapse?" Aang felt the weight of the question. This stranger, this warrior from somewhere impossible, was asking for help. Not ordering, not demanding, asking. Maybe, Aang said slowly. But I'd need to understand how it works first. Then we investigate. Kyle turned fully toward the south, toward the altar, hidden beyond the smoke and trees. You possess knowledge of this world's technology. I possess combat capability and sensor arrays. Cooperation increases probability of mission success. Mission success, Sokka repeated. Which is preventing additional dimensional breaches, protecting civilian populations from spatial anomalies. Kyle's helmet dipped slightly, surviving long enough to find a way home. The last part was quieter. Almost vulnerable if a ceramite and killing machines could be vulnerable. Aang made his decision. We'll help you, he said, but we do it our way. No unnecessary violence. No killing unless there's absolutely no other option. Kyle's helmet turned toward him. For a long moment, the Space Marine said nothing. Calculations ran behind that expressionless faceplate: threat assessments, mission parameters, doctrine protocols. Acceptable, Kyle finally stated. Civilian protection takes priority over threat elimination. Restraint protocols engaged. It wasn't quite in agreement to Aang's terms, but it was close enough. Then let's move, Katara said, already heading toward where Appa waited. That altar isn't going to investigate itself. As they walked through the ruined village toward their sky bison, Aang couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just made an alliance with something far more dangerous than Hei Bai had ever been, but also perhaps something that might actually help them stop the war. Behind them, unnoticed by anyone, the altar pulsed once more, its mechanisms calibrated, adjusted, prepared for the astronomical event that would arrive in weeks, when Sozin's comet would return and the Fire Nation would use its amplified power to tear reality open on scales that made a single Space Marine's arrival look like a candle beside the sun. The countdown had begun. Appa carried them south through smoke that refused to disperse. The sky bison's 6 legs paddled through the air with deceptive laziness, each movement propelling them forward at speeds no earthbound creature could match. Kyle stood at the saddle's edge, one ceramite boot braced against the leather rim, scanning the terrain below with sensor arrays that painted everything in thermal gradients and electromagnetic signatures. The forest thinned as they approached the altar site. Trees gave way to scorched clearings where Fire Nation engineers had carved workspace from living wood. Equipment lay scattered: surveying tools, chemical analysis kits, metal cutting apparatus that spoke of systematic resource extraction. They've been here for weeks, Sokka observed, peering over the saddle's edge. Look at those supply caches. This wasn't a quick operation. Kyle's helmet dipped in confirmation. His armor's external sensors had already cataloged the site: 3 temporary structures for personnel housing. 1 reinforced bunker likely containing command infrastructure, and at the center of it all, the altar. It rose from the earth like a monument to forbidden geometry. 7 metal pylons formed a circle 30 meters in diameter, each one inscribed with markings that hurt to look at directly. The script wasn't Fire Nation standard, too angular, too precise, suggesting influences from sources Aang didn't want to contemplate. Between the pylons, energy arced in patterns that defied natural law, crackling with colors that existed just outside normal perception. Appa set us down at the perimeter, Aang instructed. The sky bison complied, touching down with surprising gentleness for something his size. Kyle was first off the saddle bolter, sweeping the compound in controlled arcs. His tactical assessment came rapid fire. No active personnel. Recent evacuation approximately 2 hours prior. Equipment still warm. They're planning to return. How can you possibly know all that? Katara asked, hopping down beside him. Kyle tapped the side of his helmet. Thermal imaging, chemical residue analysis, electromagnetic field mapping. He paused. Technology you don't possess. Right. Magic armor. Sokka landed last boomerang already in hand despite the apparent absence of threats. So what exactly are we looking at here? The altar hummed. Not audibly, the sound registered somewhere deeper, vibrating through bone and thought. Aang felt it resonate against his connection to the spiritual realm, like discordant notes in a symphony he hadn't realized he was hearing. Spatial anchoring mechanism, Kyle stated, approaching the nearest pylon. His gauntleted hand traced the inscriptions without touching them. These symbols aren't decorative. They're mathematical formulae, instructions for reality manipulation. Can you read them? Aang asked. Partially. Kyle's helmet tilted scanner beams playing across the metalwork. The underlying principles align with warp technology from my reality. Dimensional folding, creating artificial shortcuts through space-time. His voice hardened. Weaponized applications of theoretical physics that should never have left laboratory conditions. Katara moved closer to examine one of the pylons. Water from her flask lifted automatically, probing the structure's surface like liquid fingers. Where it made contact, the inscriptions flared briefly with amber light. It's reacting to my bending, she said, pulling the water back. Like it recognizes elemental energy. Affirmative. Kyle's sensors tracked the interaction. The device is calibrated to local energy signatures. Your elemental manipulation generates measurable frequencies. The altar is designed to interface with those frequencies. Interface how? Sokka's grip tightened on his boomerang. Before Kale could answer, Aang felt something shift in the air around them. The hum intensified, climbing through registers that made his teeth ache. The space between the pylons began to shimmer, reality growing thin, like fabric stretched too tight. Move! Kale's command came too late. The altar activated. Not fully, nothing like the catastrophic rift that had brought Kyle into this world. Just a flicker, a momentary glimpse into somewhere else. Through the shimmer, Aang saw landscapes that couldn't exist. Cities of crystal that sang with impossible harmonics, oceans that flowed upward into sky rivers, beings of pure light that turned toward him with curiosity that felt like knives. Then it collapsed, the vision slamming shut with enough force to knock all of them backward. Kyle was first to recover, servo motors whining as he pushed himself upright. His armor's systems had apparently weathered the burst better than unaugmented flesh. Status report. Dizzy, Sokka groaned from where he'd landed in an undignified heap. Also nauseous, also possibly having an existential crisis about the nature of reality. I'm okay, Katara said, though her voice shook slightly. She helped Aang to his feet. What was that test activation? Kyle replied, still scanning the altar. Low power verification of system functionality. Someone triggered it remotely to confirm operational status. Aang steadied himself against Appa's leg, fighting down the urge to vomit. The glimpse of that other place lingered in his mind, beautiful and terrible, in equal measure utterly alien to anything the spirit world had ever shown him. We need to shut this down, he said. Agreed. Kyle approached the altar's central pylon, the one that pulsed with brighter energy than the others. But premature destruction risks cascade failure. We need intelligence first. Operational parameters, activation timeline, personnel roster. You think the Fire Nation engineers left that kind of information lying around? Sokka asked skeptically. Negative, but they have a base of operations. Kyle's helmet turned northeast toward something his sensors apparently detected beyond the horizon. Supply lines indicate regular resupply runs. Standard military logistics require centralized command structure. Someone is coordinating this operation from a location with sufficient resources and security. Katara's eyes narrowed. You're talking about Ba Sing Se. Unknown designation, Kyle replied. Describe the location. The capital of the Earth Kingdom, Aang explained. Biggest city in the world, massive walls, home to millions, and... He hesitated, uncertain how to explain the complexity of Ba Sing Se's political situation to someone from another reality entirely. It's complicated. Complexity acknowledged. Kyle's tactical processors apparently filed that information for later analysis. Question: does this city possess infrastructure for intelligence gathering spy networks? Information brokers. Probably, Sokka said. Though getting access to those networks might be challenging. Challenge accepted. Kyle turned to face them fully. Revised mission parameters: infiltrate Ba Sing Se. Acquire intelligence on altar operation. Identify individuals responsible for dimensional breach technology. Neutralize threat without causing civilian casualties. Infiltrate, Katara repeated. You're a 2.5-meter tall walking fortress. How exactly do you plan to infiltrate anything? Valid concern, Kyle's tactical subroutines confirmed. His armor made stealth operations difficult under optimal conditions. In an unknown urban environment with unfamiliar surveillance capabilities, the probability of detection approached 97%. Revised approach, he stated. You three conduct infiltration. I provide tactical support and extract as needed. Your capabilities allow urban navigation that my profile does not. Aang blinked in surprise. The armored warrior was acknowledging limitations that seemed fundamentally at odds with everything Kyle had demonstrated so far. The absolute confidence, the mechanical efficiency, the overwhelming superiority in nearly every combat parameter. You're trusting us? Aang asked carefully. Trust is irrelevant. Kyle's helmet dipped slightly. Tactical assessment indicates your team possesses advantages in social infiltration scenarios. Efficiency demands utilizing optimal assets for specific mission parameters. Translation: yes, he was trusting them. He just couldn't admit it in those terms. Ba Sing Se it is then, Sokka said, climbing back into Appa's saddle. Fair warning, the city has layers, literal layers. Outer ring, middle ring, inner ring. Getting to the people who'd know about something like this. He gestured at the altar. That's upper ring territory. Probably inner ring, maybe even directly connected to the Earth King. Earth King, Kale repeated, filing the designation. Planetary governance structure. More like continental governance structure with delusions of planetary importance, Sokka muttered. They boarded Appa the Sky Bison, somehow accommodating even Kyle's massive armored bulk without complaint. As they lifted into the air, leaving the altar behind to pulse its malevolent rhythm, Aang cast one final glance at the structure. The Fire Nation was building doorways to other worlds. They'd already succeeded once Kyle's presence proved that. How many more rifts were being prepared? How many more impossible warriors might come crashing through reality's fabric if the altar network completed activation? Aang. Katara's hand on his shoulder pulled him from the spiral of worst-case scenarios. We'll stop this. Yeah, he said, trying to inject confidence he didn't entirely feel. We will. Below them, the altar continued its work. Energy accumulated in patterns that would reach critical mass in exactly 23 days. coinciding with an astronomical event the Fire Nation had planned around for months. Sozin's comet would return, and when it did, the Fire Nation intended to open doorways that would make a single Space Marine's arrival look like a training exercise. The race against time had officially begun. Ba Sing Se rose from the plains like a promise carved in stone. The outer wall stood taller than any structure Aang had seen in his travels, 50 meters of solid rock, reinforced with earth-bending techniques, perfected over centuries. Guard towers punctuated the ramparts at regular intervals, each one manned by soldiers whose vigilance had kept the Fire Nation at bay for 100 years of war. Impressive fortification, Kyle observed from Appa's saddle. His helmet tracked the defensive architecture with what Aang had learned to recognize as professional appreciation. Overlapping fields of fire, minimal blind spots, structural integrity sufficient to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. "It's kept us safe this long," Katara said, though her tone carried less certainty than her words suggested. They'd landed Appa 2 kilometers outside the wall, hidden in a grove of trees where the sky bison's white fur wouldn't draw immediate attention. The plan was simple. Team Avatar would enter through legitimate channels, while Kyle remained outside maintaining contact through whatever communication methods his armor provided. Except the plan hit its first complication before they even reached the gates. "Refugees," Sokka said, pointing toward the massive queue of people waiting for entry. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretched along the approach road. Families with everything they owned piled into carts. Elderly individuals leaning on younger relatives. Children who'd learned not to cry because tears changed nothing. The war had created this human river, flowing toward the promise of safety behind Ba Sing Se's walls. "Processing will take days," Aang said quietly, watching Earth Kingdom soldiers check travel permits with bureaucratic thoroughness. "We don't have days." Kyle's helmet swiveled toward the crowd sensors cataloging faces and calculating population density. "Alternative entry points. There are service tunnels," Sokka offered. "Maintenance access for the wall's earth-bending infrastructure. But they'll be guarded. And if we're caught sneaking in?" He made a gesture suggesting unpleasant consequences. "Then we don't get caught." Katara's water flask was already uncapped, ready for whatever came next. Aang can sense the tunnel layouts through earthbending. We move fast, stay quiet, and wait. Kyle's hand rose in a halt gesture. His helmet had locked onto something in the crowd. Threat detected. Aang followed the Space Marine's eye line. At first he saw nothing out of place. Just more refugees, more carts, more exhausted faces. Then he noticed them. 3 figures moving through the crowd with purpose that didn't match the refugees' weary shuffle. They wore civilian clothing, but their movements betrayed training. The way they positioned themselves to maintain visual contact while appearing separate. The subtle hand signals coordinating their advance. Scouts. Or worse, secret police. Dai Li. Sokka breathed recognition dawning. What are they doing out here? Aang had heard stories about the Dai Li, the Earth Kingdom's elite cultural enforcers who served the king with absolute loyalty. They maintained order in Ba Sing Se through surveillance networks that supposedly knew everything happening within the walls. But outside the city, that was unusual. One of the Dai Li agents stopped, head tilting as if listening to something only he could hear. Then his eyes swept the tree line where Appa remained hidden. For a heart-stopping moment, Aang was certain they'd been detected. The agent's gaze moved past their position without pause. He gestured to his companions, and the 3 melted back into the crowd, continuing their patrol. "They're looking for something," Katara whispered. "Or someone." Kael's helmet remained locked on the agent's last known position. Probability assessment, the alter activation triggered detection protocols. If this city maintains surveillance of dimensional anomalies, they will have registered the energy spike. And they're searching for whatever came through. Aang finished, stomach sinking. They're looking for you. Affirmative. Kael's voice carried no concern, just clinical acknowledgement of tactical reality. Revised parameters infiltration must proceed with assumption of active hostile search. Probability of detection during standard entry, 94%. So we definitely can't waltz through the front gate, Sokka said. Great. Any other good news? Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. Not an earthquake, Aang's earth-bending senses were too attuned for that. This was deliberate. Controlled. Someone was using earthbending to search the terrain, sending vibrations through the soil in expanding waves. They're scanning for seismic disturbances. Toph would have said, if she'd been with them. Aang had learned enough from her to recognize the technique. It was how earthbenders saw without relying on eyes. Move, Kael commanded. They're sweeping this sector. They scrambled onto Appa the sky bison, launching into the air with enough force to scatter leaves and snap branches. Below, Aang saw 3 Dai Li agents emerge from the refugee crowd, stone gloves already forming around their hands as they traced the source of the disturbance. But Appa was already airborne, climbing fast enough that pursuit from ground level became impossible. That was too close, Katara said, catching her breath. If they're actively hunting for dimensional breaches, getting Kael into the city will be... I'm not entering the city, Kael interrupted. His helmet tracked their flight path, calculating trajectories. New approach, you 3 infiltrate as planned. I maintain position outside the walls and provide remote support. Remote support? Sokka asked. You mean like shouting encouragement from 2 kilometers away? Negative? Kael tapped a control on his gauntlet, and Aang felt something shift in the air around them. A subtle change in pressure that made his ears pop. Communication relay established. Vox channel encrypted. You will carry these. He produced 3 small devices from compartments in his armor. Each one was roughly the size of a walnut, made of the same dark metal as his bolter. They pulsed with faint amber light. Micro-transmitters, Kael explained. Attach them to your persons. I will maintain audio contact and provide tactical guidance. If extraction becomes necessary, I will know your positions. Aang accepted his transmitter carefully, feeling the warmth radiating from its surface. The technology was utterly foreign, nothing like the simple messenger hawks or smoke signals the Earth Kingdom used. This was communication that transcended distance through methods he couldn't begin to understand. You're staying behind, Aang said slowly, but you'll still be with us. Through these. Affirmative. Kael's helmet dipped in what might have been approval. You possess social navigation capabilities I lack. I possess weapons and tactical analysis you require. Division of labor maximizes mission efficiency. It made logical sense. But Aang couldn't shake the feeling that Kael was also protecting them. By staying outside the walls, he drew the Dai Li's attention away from Team Avatar. If the secret police were hunting for dimensional breaches, a space marine in full armor would register like a bonfire in darkness. Where will you position yourself? Katara asked. Kael's helmet turned toward the outer wall's eastern section, where the maintenance scaffolding clung to the ancient stonework. Optimal surveillance point, elevated position with clear sight lines into the city. Distance from your entry point approximately 800 meters. Communication range sufficient. You're going to climb the wall, Sokka said flatly. Affirmative. The 50-meter tall wall. Structural analysis indicates adequate handholds for powered armor ascent. Estimated climb time 4 minutes. Sokka opened his mouth, closed it, then shrugged. Sure. Why not? Giant armored guy climbing the world's biggest wall. That's just how today is going. They sat down again, this time in a ravine that cut through the landscape like a wound in the earth. Kyle disembarked first bolter maglock to his back movements, already transitioning into whatever mode allowed him to scale vertical surfaces. The service tunnel entrance is 300 meters northeast of the main gate, Katara said, activating the transmitter. Her voice came back through the device with crystalline clarity, as if Kyle stood beside her instead of 10 meters away. We'll enter there, then navigate to the upper ring using the underground networks. Acknowledged. Kael's form was already fading into the gathering dusk, his dark armor blending with shadows. Maintain radio discipline. Report only when necessary. Dai Li agents possess unknown surveillance capabilities. Assume all communication may be compromised. Aang attached his transmitter to his belt, feeling its weight settle against his hip. Kael, be careful. The Space Marine paused at the ravine's edge helmet, turning back toward them one final time. Caution is a luxury, he said quietly. All I can offer is efficiency. Then he was gone, disappearing into the twilight, with a silence that something his size had no right to possess. Team Avatar stood in the gathering darkness, 3 teenagers with devices that whispered of impossible technologies, preparing to infiltrate a city that didn't know it was already compromised. Somewhere above them, Dai Li agents continued their search. Somewhere below them, secret tunnels waited. And somewhere in the city's heart, people who knew about altars and dimensional breaches went about their work, unaware that their careful plans were about to be infiltrated by an airbending monk, a waterbending healer, a warrior with a boomerang, and a space marine who could apparently scale walls like they were training obstacles. The hunt had begun on both sides, but only one side knew they were being hunted back. The service tunnel smelled of earth and old water. Aang led them through darkness, broken only by Katara's waterbending. She'd pulled moisture from the air itself, shaping it into a glowing orb that floated above her palm. The light painted their shadows in harsh contrast against the tunnel walls, stretching and warping with each step. Contact in 3. Kael's voice whispered through the micro-transmitter at Aang's belt. The clarity startled him every time it sounded like the Space Marine walked beside them instead of maintaining position somewhere high above the city. 2 Dai Li agents. Standard patrol pattern. They will pass your position in approximately 40 seconds. Sokka pressed himself against the tunnel wall, boomerang ready. How can he possibly know that? His armor sees things we can't. Katara murmured, extinguishing her waterlight. Darkness swallowed them completely. Aang closed his eyes, reaching out with earth-bending senses the way Toph had taught him. Through the stone he felt vibrations. Footsteps approaching with measured cadence. 2 sets, moving in perfect synchronization. The Dai Li agents emerged from a side passage 30 meters ahead, their stone gloves glowing with barely visible green light. They moved like shadows themselves, scanning the tunnel with professional thoroughness. Team Avatar held absolutely still, breathing shallow, heartbeats loud enough to betray them if the agents possessed the right kind of hearing. One Dai Li stopped directly in front of their position, his head tilted as if sensing something wrong. Negative contact, Kael transmitted. They're using seismic detection, minimal movement. Do not shift weight. Sokka's fingers had gone white around his boomerang grip. Katara's hand hovered near her water skin, ready to defend if discovered. Aang focused on remaining motionless, fighting the urge to breathe deeper. The Dai Li agent took one step closer. Then his companion spoke. Sector clear. Proceed to next checkpoint. They moved on, disappearing into the tunnel's depths. Without looking back, Aang released breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was too close, Katara finished. We need to move faster. They pressed deeper into Ba Sing Se's underground network, following routes that Aang navigated through earthbending intuition. The tunnels branched and reconnected like blood vessels, carrying maintenance workers and secret police through arteries the city's surface population never saw. You're approaching a junction, Kyle transmitted. 4 passages converge ahead. Third exit from your left leads toward the upper ring. Estimate 12 minutes to target zone if you maintain current pace. How do you know the layout? Aang asked softly. Observation through structural analysis. Your city's architecture follows predictable patterns. Water flow indicates gradient slopes towards centralized districts. Probable inference wealth concentrates at highest elevation points. Translation: Kyle had somehow mapped significant portions of Ba Sing Se just by watching how it was built. They took the third passage. It sloped upward at a gentle angle walls, transitioning from rough stone to worked masonry. Someone had cared about this section, carved decorative patterns into the ceiling, installed proper drainage channels. Upper ring territory. Multiple contacts ahead. Kyle's voice carried new tension. 7 hostiles, armed, converging on your position from 3 directions. You have been detected. What? Sokka hissed. How? No time to answer. Footsteps echoed from ahead and behind the sound of boots moving with purpose. Dai Li agents materialized from passages that shouldn't have existed, their stone gloves gleaming in the darkness. Halt, the lead agent commanded. His voice carried absolute authority. You are trespassing in restricted zones. Submit to questioning or be classified as enemy infiltrators. Aang raised his hands in a placating gesture. We're not enemies. We're just lies. The agent's glove reshaped itself into sharp edges. Seismic sensors detected dimensional residue on your persons. You have been in contact with the breach entity. Where is it? They knew. Somehow the Dai Li had equipment sophisticated enough to detect traces of Kyle's presence, the dimensional energy that clung to anyone who'd touched technology from another reality. The micro-transmitters. Extraction protocol initiated. Kyle transmitted. Hold position for 60 seconds. We don't have 60 seconds. Katara's water whip materialized, coiling defensively. The Dai Li didn't wait for further conversation. Earth erupted from the tunnel floor, stone hands reaching to grab restrained capture. Sokka's boomerang carved through the first attack, shattering rock with precision born from years of fighting benders. Aang spun into motion, airbending, creating a vortex that deflected the worst of the assault. But there were too many angles. Too many attackers, not enough space to maneuver. One stone hand caught Sokka's ankle, yanking him off balance. Another wrapped around Katara's wrist, crushing her water skin. Aang felt earth close around his own legs, immobilizing him with crushing pressure. Got you, the lead Dai Li said, stepping forward. You will tell us everything about the breach, where it originated, what came through, how to contain it. His hand rose toward Aang's forehead, green energy flickering around his fingers. Not earthbending, something else. Something that made Aang's skin crawl with instinctive wrongness. Be still, the agent whispered. This will only hurt if you resist. The energy touched Aang's temples, and the world exploded. Kyle crashed through the tunnel ceiling in a shower of pulverized stone and mortar. His bolter tracked targets with mechanical precision, discharging 3 rounds in rapid succession. They screamed past the Dai Li agents' heads, detonating against the tunnel walls with enough force to create shock waves that knocked everyone off their feet. The earth restraints shattered. Aang stumbled free, ears ringing from the blasts. "Extract! Now!" Kael's voice came from everywhere at once, the transmitters and his helmet's external speakers overlapping into stereo command. His armored form filled the tunnel like a titan made manifest, too large for this space, too overwhelming for human scale. The Dai Li agents scattered stone armor forming across their bodies as they prepared counterattacks. But Kael had already calculated their trajectories. His gauntlet lashed out, catching one agent mid-motion and slamming him into the wall hard enough to crack ribs, but not kill. "Suppressive fire," Kael stated calmly, bolter, sweeping in controlled arcs. He wasn't aiming at the agents, just forcing them behind cover, keeping them pinned while Team Avatar recovered. "This way." Katara grabbed Aang's arm, pulling him toward a side passage Kael's entry had revealed. Sokka followed, limping slightly from where the stone hand had caught him. They ran through tunnels that Kael destroyed behind them, his armored fists punching through support pillars to create cave-ins that blocked pursuit. The Dai Li would dig through eventually. Earthbending could move mountains given time. But time was what Team Avatar needed. They burst from the tunnels into open air that tasted of freedom and failure in equal measure. "Casualties?" Kael asked, emerging behind them with disturbing silence for something that had just demolished half a tunnel network. "Bruised," Sokka said. "Shaken. Possibly traumatized by watching you break architecture with your bare hands." "Acceptable." Kael's helmet swiveled, scanning their surroundings. They'd emerged in the lower ring, the poorest district where buildings leaned against each other like exhausted refugees. "Mission status compromised. The Dai Li possessed detection capabilities beyond projected parameters." "They knew we'd been near you," Aang said, still catching his breath. "The transmitters. They could sense the dimensional energy." Kael's helmet dipped in acknowledgement. He produced the 3 devices, examining them with sensor arrays. "Contamination confirmed. Residual energy signature. I should have anticipated this." For the first time since meeting him, Aang heard something like frustration in Kae's voice. "It's not your fault," Katara said. "We didn't know they had that kind of technology." "Irrelevant. Mission failure results from inadequate intelligence gathering." Kael crushed the transmitters in his gauntlet, the metal crumpling like paper. "New approach required. The Dai Li possess knowledge of dimensional breaches. This suggests organizational awareness at leadership level." "So we find their leader," Sokka said. "And we would ask nicely for information." "Negative." Kael's helmet turned toward the city's center, where lights burned brightest. "We infiltrate their command structure, acquire data directly, locate individuals with knowledge of altar operations." "That's Lake Laogai," Aang said quietly, recognition dawning. "Their secret headquarters, where they take people who ask too many questions about the war." Katara's expression hardened. "Where they brainwash citizens into believing everything is fine. Then that's where the answers are." Kael's bolter clicked as he checked the magazine. Probability assessment: the Dai Li coordinate with Fire Nation elements on dimensional breach research. Shared intelligence. Mutual benefit arrangements. It made horrible sense. The Earth Kingdom's secret police working with the Fire Nation on reality-tearing weapons, all hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and the comforting lie that there was no war in Ba Sing Se. "We're not ready for this," Aang said. "Lake Laogai is supposed to be impenetrable." "Nothing is impenetrable." Kael's voice carried absolute certainty. "Only variable difficulty. Question: do you possess contacts within the city, individuals with knowledge of underground networks, resistance elements?" Aang exchanged glances with Katara and Sokka. They'd been on their own so long, trusting only each other. But this was bigger than them now. Maybe, Sokka said slowly. There's a tea shop in the middle ring, an old man who used to be a Fire Nation general. He might know something. General designation. Iroh, Dragon of the West. Kyle's helmet tilted fractionally. Former enemy commander operating tea establishment in hostile territory. Probability of intelligence value high. Recommendation, establish contact immediately. The decision crystallized. They couldn't infiltrate Lake Laogai blind. They needed allies. They needed information. They needed someone who understood the games being played in Ba Sing Se's shadows. Then we visit a tea shop, Aang said. As they moved through the lower ring's crowded streets blending into the evening foot traffic, none of them noticed the Dai Li agent watching from a rooftop 3 buildings away. His stone glove pulsed with faint green light as he transmitted information through channels that led deep beneath the city. To Lake Laogai, to people who'd been expecting this exact scenario, to a trap that was already closing around them piece by careful piece. The hunt continued. But the prey had just walked into the hunter's chosen ground. The jasmine dragon sat tucked between a noodle vendor and a fabric merchant. Its exterior modest enough to escape notice from anyone not actively searching. Aang pushed through the door, triggering a small bell that chimed with unexpected clarity. The interior smelled of tea leaves and wood smoke, warm despite the evening chill settling over Ba Sing Se. A handful of customers occupied corner tables, conversing in low tones that suggested business better conducted away from official ears. Behind the counter stood an elderly man whose physique seemed at odds with his age. Broad shoulders beneath simple robes, hands that moved with precision as he poured tea into ceramic cups. When he looked up, his eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much war and choosing kindness anyway. "Welcome, friends." Iroh's voice carried genuine warmth. "You look like you could use tea. Perhaps ginseng. It helps with stress." Sokka glanced around, confirming no other patrons were close enough to overhear. "We're looking for information. Someone said you might help." Iroh's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps? Or calculation disguised as grandfatherly concern? "Information is like tea best shared in the proper setting. Please sit. I will close the shop." He moved to the door, flipping the sign from open to closed with practiced ease. The remaining customers departed without protest, as if they'd been expecting this. Within moments, the shop stood empty, except for Team Avatar and the old general. "Now then," Iroh settled into a chair across from them, pouring tea with movements that bordered on ritual. "What brings the Avatar to my humble establishment, and why do you travel with someone who smells of dimensional rifts?" Aang nearly choked on his first sip. "You know about... I am old, not blind." Iroh's expression turned serious. "The air around you, 3 carries traces of something that does not belong in this world. Residual energy from contact with..." He paused, searching for words. "Whatever came through the breach 2 days ago." "You felt it too," Katara said. Not a question. The entire city felt it. Most dismissed the sensation as spiritual unrest, but those of us who have studied the deeper mysteries recognized it for what it was, a tear in reality's fabric. Iroh refilled their cups. "I assume the being that fell through is not present because it would draw unwanted attention." "He's maintaining a perimeter position," Sokka said, "watching for Dai Li patrols. You know, like a completely normal Tuesday afternoon activity." "Wise. The Dai Li have been agitated since the breach. They hunt something they barely understand. Iroh's tone carried warning. You should not be here. Ba Sing Se is not safe for those touched by dimensional anomalies. We know, Aang said. We were captured in the tunnels. One of them tried to... He touched his forehead, remembering the green energy. Something to my mind. Iroh's expression darkened. Brainwashing techniques. The Dai Li perfect such methods at Lake Laogai. You were fortunate to escape. Our friend broke us out, Katara said. But we need to go back. Lake Laogai has information about the altars, the devices causing the rifts. The Fire Nation is building a network. When Sazan's comet returns, they plan to tear open doorways on a massive scale. The teacup paused halfway to Iroh's lips. Sozan's comet, of course. An astronomical amplifier for fire and energy. He set the cup down carefully. You understand what you're suggesting? The Fire Nation collaborating with Earth Kingdom's secret police on reality-warping weapons. We saw the altar, Aang insisted. Mathematical formulas carved into metal. Technology that shouldn't exist. Someone is sharing knowledge across enemy lines. Iroh stood moving to the window. Outside, Ba Sing Se continued its evening routines. Merchants closing shops, families heading home, lanterns flickering to life as darkness settled. A city convinced of its own safety, while conspiracies rotted its foundations. War makes for strange alliances, Iroh said quietly. I have heard whispers, rumors of Earth Kingdom elements willing to work with anyone who might end the conflict, even if it means unleashing forces they cannot control. Can you help us? Aang asked. Before Iroh could answer, the shop's back door opened. A young man entered his face carrying familiar scars that marked him as Fire Nation nobility. He froze when he saw Team Avatar hand instinctively moving toward his waist, where no weapon hung. Uncle? Zuko's voice carried warning. What are they doing here? Having tea, Iroh replied calmly. Would you like some? I don't want tea. I want to know why the Avatar is sitting in our shop. Zuko's eyes burned with intensity. Aang recognized the same desperate hunger for purpose he'd seen in their previous encounters. This is a trap. They're going to turn us into the authorities. Actually, we're hiding from the authorities, Sokka offered. Same as you, I'd guess. Zuko's jaw tightened. We're nothing alike. You're both running, Katara said softly. From the Fire Nation. From expectations. From who people think you should be. You don't know anything about me. But Zuko's protest lacked conviction. Iroh placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. These young people need help. As do we, though you refuse to admit it. Perhaps cooperation serves both interests. Cooperation? Zuko pulled away. They're the enemy, are they? Iroh gestured at Team Avatar. Or are they simply people trying to prevent catastrophe? Tell me, nephew, if the Fire Nation tears holes in reality itself, what do you think will come through? More peaceful monks or something far worse? The question hung in the air like smoke. Zuko's fists clenched and unclenched. His internal struggle played out across his face, honor demanding one thing, reason suggesting another. Finally, he spoke through gritted teeth. What do you need? Relief flooded through Aang. Information, layout of Lake Laogai, guard rotations, anything that could help us infiltrate without triggering a full lockdown. I don't have that. Zuko moved to the window, checking the street with practiced wariness. But I know someone who might. A White Lotus member who works as a city planner. He'd have architectural records. White Lotus? Aang looked to Iroh for confirmation. The old general smiled. An ancient society dedicated to wisdom and enlightenment. Members across all nations working toward peace through understanding rather than conquest. We maintain networks, even in cities like this. You're asking us to trust a secret organization? Sokka's skepticism was palpable. I am asking you to accept help from people who share your goals. Iroh refilled his own cup, steam rising in delicate spirals. The White Lotus opposes the war. We oppose dimensional breaches even more strongly. Reality's stability serves everyone's interests. A sound cut through their conversation. Kael's voice, emerging from the communicator at Aang's belt, somehow still functional, despite being destroyed earlier. Contact. Dai Li Patrol converging on your position. 6 agents. Estimate 3 minutes to arrival. Everyone in the shop went still. Your friend has remarkable surveillance capabilities, Iroh observed. But we should not test them. There is an exit through the cellar. It connects to maintenance tunnels that the Dai Li do not fully monitor. How do you know that? Katara asked. Because the White Lotus helped build this city's infrastructure. We placed deliberate gaps in the surveillance network for precisely these situations. Iroh moved to a trap door behind the counter. Come. We relocate to safer ground. They descended into darkness that smelled of preserved vegetables and old stone. Iroh led them through passages that twisted like arteries through Ba Sing Se's underbelly. Different routes than the Dai Li-controlled tunnels, older and less maintained. Your armored friend, Iroh said as they walked. Can he meet us at the northern wall? There is a section where White Lotus members maintain watch. He would be safer there than exposed on the outer fortifications. Aang activated the communicator. Kael, change of plans. We have a potential ally. Can you relocate to northern wall section coordinates? He looked to Iroh. Grid reference 774, Iroh supplied. Tell him to look for the dragon emblem carved into the stonework. Kael's response came after a brief pause. Dragon emblem confirmed via visual scan. Relocating. Estimate arrival in 12 minutes. Zuko shook his head in disbelief. What is he? Complicated, Sokka said, and heavily armed. But on our side, we think. They emerged from the tunnels into a garden courtyard hidden behind residential buildings. Stars had replaced the sun, their light competing with paper lanterns hung from wooden posts. The space felt removed from the city's chaos, a pocket of tranquility maintained through deliberate isolation. Here we can speak freely, Iroh said. White Lotus safe houses are warded against Dai Li surveillance. Now tell me everything about these altars. Leave nothing out. Aang explained while Iroh listened with the focus of someone processing tactical intelligence. When the account finished, the old general sat in thoughtful silence. This is worse than I feared, he finally said. The Dai Li I expected to be thorough. But Fire Nation collaboration that suggests Long Feng has made bargains that transcend national loyalty. Long Feng? Katara asked. Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se, the Dai Li's leader. He controls information flow throughout the city. Iroh's expression hardened. If he coordinates with Fire Nation elements on dimensional research, then Lake Laogai is more than a brainwashing facility. It is a command center for reality warfare. Then we go in loud, Zuko said. His hand moved unconsciously toward where flames would gather. Fight our way through. Destroy whatever they're building. Negative. Everyone turned. Kael had arrived without sound, his armored form somehow fitting through the garden entrance despite its size. He carried a scroll bearing the dragon emblem, apparently retrieved from the White Lotus contact on the wall. Premature assault increases civilian casualties. Kael continued, we require precise intelligence first. Structural layout, personnel count, objective locations. His helmet turned to Iroh. The White Lotus possesses such information. Iroh unrolled the scroll Kael had brought. Architectural diagrams spread across the table Lake Laogai, rendered in precise detail. Chambers, passages, guard stations marked with careful notation. We do now, Iroh said quietly. Kael studied the layout with scanner arrays cross-referencing against tactical databases Aang couldn't begin to understand. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of mission parameters falling into place. Primary objective, information acquisition. Secondary objective, prisoner extraction if innocents are detained. Tertiary objective, infrastructure disruption without structural collapse. Proposed approach, surgical strike team. Minimal footprint, maximum efficiency. He looked up from the diagram's helmet sweeping across the assembled group. You will need to trust me, Kael said. Completely. No hesitation, no questioning orders during active engagement. Can you do that? Aang met the Space Marine's gaze through that expressionless faceplate. Trust didn't come easy, not after 100 years of war, not after betrayals and losses that still ached like fresh wounds. But Kael had pulled them from certain capture, had acknowledged his own mistakes, had chosen restraint over overwhelming force. Yes, Aang said. Katara and Sokka nodded agreement. Zuko crossed his arms but didn't object. Iroh smiled. Then we plan an infiltration. The Dragon of the West and a warrior from beyond reality working together to break the Earth Kingdom's most secure facility. He poured fresh tea. My life has taken interesting turns. Through the garden's open sky, stars looked down on Ba Sing Se. In the morning, they would assault Lake Laogai. Tonight they planned. Dawn came to Ba Sing Se like a held breath. Aang stood in the garden courtyard watching light creep across the city's rooftops, painting stone and tile in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere beyond those walls, Sozin's comet continued its inexorable approach, 21 days now, until it blazed across the sky and gave the Fire Nation power they'd use to tear reality apart. 21 days to stop them. You're up early? Iroh emerged from the safe house carrying 2 cups of tea. Or perhaps you never slept. Hard to sleep knowing what's coming. Aang accepted the offered cup, grateful for its warmth against the morning chill. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. The altar activating, more rifts opening, things coming through that make Kael look harmless by comparison. Fear of the unknown is natural. Iroh settled onto a stone bench, steam rising from his tea in lazy spirals. But you cannot fight tomorrow's battles today. You can only prepare. Inside the safe house, Kael stood over the Lake Laogai diagrams like a general planning war. His helmet's glow painted the architectural drawings in cold blue light as his sensors cataloged entry points, guard stations, structural vulnerabilities. Katara and Sokka watched in fascination as he traced assault routes with one ceramite finger. Primary infiltration vector, eastern drainage system. Kael's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Secondary access through ventilation networks. Tertiary contingency direct breach through western wall section with structural demolition charges. Demolition charges. Sokka's eyes widened. You have explosives. Negative. I will create improvised devices from available materials. Kael's helmet tilted toward a list he'd compiled. Fertilizer compounds from garden supplies. Volatile chemicals from apothecary storage. Ignition mechanisms from... Let's try the drainage system first, Katara interrupted hastily. before we start making bombs in a residential district. Zuko leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, expressions cycling through skepticism and reluctant interest. Even if we get inside, Lake Laogai has over 100 Dai Li agents. You're planning to fight through an army with 6 people? 7. Iroh corrected gently. I am old, not useless. We're not fighting through anyone, Aang said, stepping back inside. The tea had steadied him slightly, though anxiety still coiled in his chest. This is an information-gathering mission. We get in, find out what Long Feng knows about the altars, and get out. Minimal casualties, preferably 0. Kael's helmet swiveled toward him. Probability of 0 casualties during hostile infiltration, less than 4%. Enemy forces will resist. Lethal force will become necessary. The room fell silent. This was the conversation they'd been avoiding since agreeing to the plan. The fundamental clash between Aang's principles and Kael's tactical reality. Balance versus efficiency. Life versus mission. No killing, Aang said quietly. We've been over this. Affirmative. You have stated that position multiple times. Kael's voice remained neutral, but something in his stance suggested careful consideration. Question: at what cost? If restraint protocols result in mission failure, acceptable civilian casualties number in the thousands, potentially millions if the altar network activates. He's not wrong, Zuko said, earning surprised looks from everyone. I've seen what happens when you hesitate. People die anyway. Just different people. There has to be another way. Katara's hands had formed fists. We can't become what we're fighting against. Kael stood motionless for 3 full seconds, an eternity by his standards. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted infinitesimally. Not softer, but considering. Proposal. Mission parameters include lethal force authorization only under specific conditions. 1 immediate threat to civilian life. 2 hostile forces attempting to activate altar network prematurely. 3 extraction scenarios where non-lethal options have been exhausted. He paused. All other engagements utilize suppression and incapacitation protocols. Acceptable. Aang felt the weight of the compromise. Kael was offering to fight with one hand tied behind his back, accepting handicaps that increased his own risk while honoring Aang's principles. It wasn't perfect. But perfection wasn't an option when reality itself hung in the balance. Acceptable, Aang said. Iroh nodded approval. A warrior who knows when not to kill is more dangerous than one who kills without thought. You learn quickly, Brother Sergeant. Learning is survival. Kael returned his attention to the diagrams. Revised approach, non-lethal breach. Priority targets for incapacitation versus elimination. Team coordination utilizing elemental bending for crowd control rather than lethal application. His finger traced new routes. Avatar takes point, airbending creates disorientation without permanent harm. Waterbender provides restraint via ice formation. Earthbender. He paused. You do not have an earthbender in your formation. Toph's not here, Sokka said. She's somewhere else. Probably terrorizing some other city with her metal-seeing, earth-smashing awesomeness. Suboptimal. Kael's tactical processors recalculated. Earthbending provides optimal control in underground facilities. Without it, probability of detection increases by 37%. Then we'll have to be 37% better at not getting caught, Katara said. Zuko pushed off from the wall. I can provide fire support. Controlled burns for area denial. Heat distortion to obscure visual tracking. concussive blasts to disable without killing. You would help us? Aang couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. I'm helping prevent reality from collapsing. Zuko's jaw set stubbornly. Don't mistake that for friendship. Noted. Kael's helmet dipped in what might have been approval. Firebending provides tactical flexibility. Acceptable addition to strike team. Recommendation you position yourself as mobile disruption element. Create chaos while primary team advances toward intelligence targets. I'm good at chaos, Zuko muttered. The planning continued through the morning. Routes memorized, contingencies established, equipment gathered from White Lotus caches that Iroh accessed through channels he didn't explain. By noon, they'd assembled a collection of tools that looked more like burglar's kit than military arsenal grappling hooks. Smoke grenades of Iroh's own design, water skins for Katara, extra boomerangs for Sokka. Kael contributed items from his own supplies, a cutting tool that sliced through metal like paper, light sticks that would illuminate underground chambers without betraying position, and something he called a breaching charge compact, powerful, and deeply concerning. Last resort only, Kael specified when he saw Aang's expression. Structural integrity preservation takes priority. As evening approached, they gathered one final time around the diagrams. The plan had evolved from the rough concept to detailed operation. Everyone knew their role. The risks had been calculated, accepted, internalized. One more thing, Iroh said, producing a scroll from his robes. I took the liberty of contacting White Lotus members within Lake Laogai's support staff. Maintenance workers, cooks, cleaners, people Longfeng barely notices. They will create distractions at key moments. Shift changes that run late. Equipment failures that require immediate attention. Small things that open small windows. You have people inside? Sokka asked. The White Lotus has people everywhere. Iroh smiled. We have been playing the long game for centuries. One does not change the world overnight. Kael's helmet tilted. Strategic infiltration across generational timescales. Efficient. We prefer to call it patience. Iroh set the scroll on the table. But tonight, we act with speed. Longfeng knows something is coming. The Dai Li are too alert for it to be otherwise. We strike before he can fortify further. Aang felt his stomach tighten. This was it. The moment where planning became action. Where they committed to a path that would either save reality or hasten its collapse. When do we go? Katara asked. Kael checked internal chronometers. Optimal insertion time 2 hours post-sunset. Guard shift change coincides with reduced patrol density. Lunar phase provides minimal ambient light. Weather forecasts predict cloud cover obscuring celestial observation. He means midnight, Sokka translated. Under cover of darkness. Very dramatic. Dramatics are irrelevant. Kael's bolter clicked as he performed final systems check. Efficiency is paramount. Zuko moved to the courtyard, beginning the breathing exercises that preceded firebending meditation. Katara followed to practice water forms. Sokka sharpened his boomerang with methodical care, each preparing in their own way for what came next. Aang remained at the table staring at the diagrams. Somewhere in Lake Laogai's depths, Longfeng kept secrets that could prevent catastrophe. Information about the altars, the Fire Nation collaboration, maybe even how to shut down the network permanently. But to get that information, they'd have to breach the Earth Kingdom's most secure facility, fight past elite guards, navigate defenses designed to break spirits and minds alike, and do it all without becoming the kind of people who killed without thought. You carry heavy weight, Iroh observed, settling beside him. Someone has to, Aang said quietly. Yes, but not alone. Iroh gestured at the others, Katara flowing through forms like water given life. Sokka's hands steady despite the danger ahead, Zuko's fire dancing between controlled and wild, Kyle standing like a monument to unshakable purpose. You have built something rare here. A team from impossible pieces. The Avatar and a Space Marine. Water Tribe and Fire Nation. Ancient wisdom and future warfare. Will it be enough? That, Iroh said, pouring fresh tea, is what we discover tonight. Darkness fell over Ba Sing Se. The city's lights flickered to life lanterns and torches, painting warm glows against approaching shadow. Somewhere beneath those streets, Lake Laogai waited, its guards standing ready, its secrets buried deep, its purpose twisted toward ends that would tear the world apart. At midnight, 7 people would walk into that darkness. What they found there would determine whether reality survived the coming comet, or whether Sazan's return would herald an age where the boundaries between worlds meant nothing and monsters from 1,000 nightmares poured through gates no one could close. The countdown had reached its final hours. Soon they would know. Midnight swallowed Ba Sing Se whole. The drainage tunnel stank of algae and stagnant water, its walls slick with decades of accumulated slime. Aang moved through the darkness, with earth-bending senses extended, feeling the stone's memory of water flow and structural stress. Behind him, the team advanced in single file, Katara's ice providing silent footholds. Sokka's breathing controlled despite the confined space, Zuko radiating barely suppressed heat. And Kyle, silent as death itself, armored form somehow navigating passages that shouldn't accommodate something his size. 20 meters to junction point, Kyle transmitted through the replacement communicators Iroh had provided. These weren't contaminated with dimensional residue, just simple mechanical devices that relied on sound conduction through metal pipes. White Lotus asset confirms guard rotation, delayed by 4 minutes. Window remains open. They emerged into a maintenance shaft that climbed toward Lake Laogai's lower levels. Iron rungs set into concrete provided handholds for workers who'd never expected their access routes to become invasion vectors. Aang went first airbending to cushion any sound his movements might make. The shaft opened into a storage chamber filled with cleaning supplies and forgotten equipment. Empty. Just as the White Lotus informant had promised. Aang signaled all clear and the team filtered in. Kyle was last through his armor, scraping against the narrow opening despite his best efforts. Once inside, he immediately moved to the chamber's far door, sensors sweeping for contacts beyond. 3 guards, 50 meters north. Patrol pattern consistent with intelligence reports. His helmet turned back toward the team. Engagement unavoidable. Recommend incapacitation via coordinated strike. Avatar provides distraction. Waterbender executes restraint. I provide backup if needed. Aang nodded, moving to the door. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear of the guards, but from what this represented. The line between infiltration and invasion. The moment where their presence became undeniable. He pushed the door open. The corridor beyond stretched in both directions, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows. The 3 Dai Li agents turned as one stone gloves already forming. Their eyes widened at the sight of the Avatar. In true. Aang didn't let him finish. Wind erupted from his palms, a concentrated blast that caught all 3 guards and slammed them against the far wall. Before they could recover, Katara's water whip snaked forward, freezing around their wrists and ankles in restraints that crackled with frost. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds. Casualties 0, Kyle observed emerging from the storage room. Optimal efficiency. Proceed. They moved deeper into Lake Lao Gai's maze. The architecture spoke of paranoia made manifest corridors that doubled back on themselves. Doors that led to dead ends, stairways that climbed to nowhere. Only Kyle's sensors and Aang's earthbending kept them oriented as they navigated toward the central command area. Twice more they encountered patrols. Twice more they disabled guards without lethal force. Ice and wind and carefully applied momentum that left people unconscious but breathing. Then they reached the main chamber. It opened before them like a cathedral to secrets. 3 stories tall, ringed with balconies where Dai Li agents maintained vigilance. And at the center, raised on a platform of carved jade, sat a command station bristling with communication equipment and document storage. Long Feng stood at that station, hands clasped behind his back as if he'd been expecting them. Avatar Aang. His voice carried across the chamber without effort. And what an interesting collection of allies you've assembled. Water Tribe, Fire Nation Trader, and... His gaze fixed on Kale. The breach entity itself. How convenient. 50 Dai Li agents materialized from alcoves and doorways surrounding them in overlapping fields of fire. Stone gloves gleamed in the lamplight. The trap had been perfect. Let them penetrate deep enough to feel confident, then close the net. Stand down, Long Feng commanded. You are trespassing on Earth Kingdom sovereign territory. Surrender, and your deaths will be quick. Kyle's bolter came up in one fluid motion. Negative. The Grand Secretariat's eyes narrowed. You would fight 100 men, if necessary. Kyle's helmet swept the chamber tactical overlays, marking every hostile, every angle, every structural weakness. But you will not force that scenario. You want information, what I am, where I come from, how to control the dimensional breaches. Long Feng's expression shifted fractionally. Surprise quickly masked. You presume much. I calculate accurately. Kyle took one measured step forward. 50 Dai Li tensed, ready to attack. Counter proposal? Information exchange. I provide technical data on dimensional mechanics. You provide intelligence on alter network operations. Both parties benefit. Alternative violent confrontation resulting in facility destruction and information loss. The chamber held its breath. Aang watched Long Feng's face, reading the calculation behind his eyes. The Grand Secretariat hadn't survived decades of political intrigue by being reckless. He was weighing options, fight and risk, losing everything, or negotiate with an entity that clearly understood leverage. What guarantee do I have you'll honor such an exchange? Long Feng asked. None, but you have equal absence of guarantee that you can contain me through force. Kyle's bolter tracked across the assembled guards with mechanical precision. My armor's sensor arrays have mapped every agent in this facility. Exit vectors calculated. Structural demolition points identified. Probability of successful violent extraction, 73%. Probability of your survival during such extraction, 12%. Sokka whispered to Katara. Is he bluffing? I don't think he knows how to bluff, she whispered back. Long Feng's fingers drummed once against his desk. Decision made. Very well. Lower your weapons, all of you. The command was directed at both the Dai Li and Team Avatar. Slowly, reluctantly, combat readiness dissolved into wary standoff. The altars, Long Feng said, moving to a filing cabinet, are not a Fire Nation innovation. The technology originated from research conducted jointly between Earth Kingdom scientists and acquired specialists. Acquired from where? Aang demanded. From wherever we could find them. Long Feng produced a scroll, unrolling it across his desk. When the Fire Nation began winning the war, decisively certain elements within the Earth Kingdom concluded that conventional warfare was insufficient. We needed advantages, weapons they couldn't counter. The scroll showed diagrams similar to what they'd seen at the forest altar, but more complex. Networks of pylons connected by energy matrices, calculations that hurt to read directly. We found a scholar, Long Feng continued, a Fire Nation deserter who claimed to understand dimensional mathematics. He showed us how astronomical events could amplify natural weak points in reality structure. How to force those weak points open. He trailed off, gaze distant. How to weaponize the space between worlds? Kyle finished. Yes. Long Feng looked at the Space Marine directly. Your arrival was unintentional, a test activation that succeeded beyond projections. We expected energy discharge. Instead, we tore a hole large enough to pull something through. The network, Katara said. How many altars? 17. Positioned at calculated intervals across Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation territories. When Sozin's comet provides sufficient amplification, they will activate simultaneously. Long Feng's expression was unreadable. Opening doorways to locations we barely understand. Why? Aang felt cold spreading through his chest. What could possibly be worth risking that victory? Long Feng's voice carried absolute certainty. The Fire Nation will send their forces through the doorways, expecting to conquer new territories. Instead, they will encounter whatever exists on the other side. Either they succeed, expanding the war beyond our world, or they fail, catastrophically depleting their military strength to the point of collapse. Either outcome serves the Earth Kingdom. The logic was monstrous in its simplicity. Use dimensional warfare as a weapon aimed at the Fire Nation. Let them bleed themselves dry against unknown enemies in unknown worlds. You're insane, Zuko breathed. You'll destroy everything. I will do what is necessary. Long Feng's jaw set, as I have always done, as the Earth King lacks the courage to do. This war ends when I decide it ends. Kael's helmet tilted fractionally. Assessment subject demonstrates megalomaniacal tendencies. Probability of rational negotiation near 0. Recommendation, immediate incapacitation and data seizure. Agreed, Aang said. They moved as one. Wind and water and fire erupted across the chamber. Dai Li responded with stone and earth, the massive space becoming a maelstrom of elemental fury. Kael's bolters spoke in controlled bursts, suppressive fire that shattered cover without killing those behind it. Long Feng fled toward the chamber's rear exit. Aang pursued on columns of air, catching him 10 meters from escape. They crashed together, the Grand Secretariat's earthbending forming armor, even as Aang's wind stripped it away. You don't understand, Long Feng shouted over the chaos. The Fire Nation must be stopped, whatever the cost. Not this cost. Aang twisted, using airbending to pin Long Feng against a wall. Not reality itself. Behind them, the battle raged. Katara froze a dozen Dai Li in ice. Sokka's boomerang carved through stone formations with impossible precision. Zuko fought like someone releasing years of anger fire, not wild but controlled, directed, purposeful. And Kael stood at the center like an immovable object, his armor weathering attacks that would have killed anyone else. He didn't fire to kill, just to disable, to scatter, to create space for the others to work. Then the chamber floor trembled. Not from the fighting, from something deeper. a resonance that vibrated through the stone with familiar wrongness. "No," Aang whispered, recognizing the sensation. "The altar beneath Lake Laogai," because of course there would be one beneath Lake Laogai, had activated. Kyle felt it too. His helmet snapped toward the floor sensor, screaming warnings. "Dimensional breach imminent. Energy signature matches test activation pattern. Estimate 30 seconds to full manifestation." Long Feng smiled through bloodied teeth. Insurance. If capture became inevitable, the fail-safe triggers automatically. In 30 seconds, something comes through. Something that will destroy you. Destroy this facility and provide proof that dimensional weapons work exactly as designed. "Shut it down," Katara shouted. "Can't. Once initiated, the sequence is irreversible." Long Feng's eyes gleamed with fanatic certainty. "You wanted to stop the altars? Good luck stopping this one." The floor cracked. Light poured through not natural light, but the sickly colors Aang remembered from the forest test activation. Reality growing thin, something massive pressing against the barrier between worlds. 20 seconds. "Evacuation protocol," Kyle commanded. "All personnel withdraw immediately." "There are prisoners here," Aang protested. "People Long Feng brainwashed. We can't leave them." 15 seconds. Kyle's helmet swiveled between the spreading breach and the corridor leading to the detention levels. Calculations ran behind that expressionless faceplate. Probability matrices, risk assessments, the cold mathematics of who lived and who died. "Go," he said to Aang. "Get the prisoners. I will delay the breach." "You can't. I am the only one who can." Kyle's bolter mag locked to his back. He pulled the breaching charge from his armor. "This device generates shaped directional energy. If detonated at the breach's focal point, it may disrupt the resonance pattern long enough for evacuation." "That's a suicide run," Sokka said. 10 seconds. "Affirmative." As Kyle moved toward the spreading crack, each step measured despite the urgency. "Probability of survival, minimal. Probability of mission success without this action, 0. The choice is clear." "No." Aang grabbed Kale's arm, or tried to. His hand barely spanned the ceramite bracer. "There has to be another way." Kale's helmet turned toward him. For a moment, something in that mechanical voice shifted. Became almost human. "This is what I am, Avatar. What I was made for. Duty, sacrifice, protection of those who cannot protect themselves." He pulled free gently. "Go. Save them. That is your duty." 5 seconds. Aang ran. Katara and Sokka and Zuko followed, sprinting toward the detention levels. Behind them, they heard Kyle's heavy footsteps approaching the breach, the whine of the explosives activation sequence, the roar of something vast and terrible forcing its way through reality's fabric. And then silence. Not absence of sound, active negation, as if the universe itself held its breath. In the detention levels, Aang found them. 20 prisoners' minds broken by brainwashing eyes, vacant. He and Katara worked frantically using water bending to break Dai Li conditioning, air bending to guide confused people toward exits. Above them, Lake Laogai shuddered. The facility began to collapse. Stone rained from Lake Laogai's ceiling like judgment. Aang shepherded the last prisoner through a maintenance tunnel as the facility tore itself apart above them. Dust choked the air. Support beams groaned. Somewhere in the depths, water mains had ruptured, flooding lower levels with the lake that gave this place its name. They emerged into moonlight and chaos. Ba Sing Se's alarm bells rang across the city. Dai Li agents swarmed the collapsing structure, pulling survivors from rubble, shouting orders that no one followed. In the confusion, Team Avatar and the rescued prisoners slipped away into shadows aided by White Lotus members who materialized from the crowd with practiced precision. "This way," Iroh whispered, guiding them through back alleys toward a safe house 3 districts away. "Quickly. The city will be locked down within the hour." Aang looked back once. Smoke rose from Lake Laogai's ruins, illuminated by fires that turned night into false dawn. Somewhere beneath that destruction, Kale had faced the breach alone, had bought them time with his life. The thought sat in Aang's chest like lead. They reached the safe house as the first light touched Ba Sing Se's eastern wall. Iroh barred the door behind them, then moved immediately to tend the rescued prisoners. These people had been trapped in Long Feng's web for months, some for years. Their recovery would take time that the world didn't have. "Kael," Katara said softly. She stood at the window, staring toward the ruins. "Do you think he knew the probabilities?" Sokka's voice was flat. "Minimal survival chance. He made his choice." "That doesn't make it easier," Zuko said. He'd positioned himself in a corner, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But his hands shook slightly. "He saved us. All of us." Aang moved to the table where Iroh had spread the documents they'd seized from Long Feng's command station. Diagrams of the 17 Altar network, activation sequences, astronomical calculations showing Sozin's comet's approach. 18 days now until it blazed across the sky. 18 days to stop a dimensional weapon network that spanned 2 nations. Without Kael's tactical expertise, without his sensors, without him. "We can't do this alone," Aang said quietly. "We're not alone." Iroh placed teacups before each of them. "The White Lotus has agents throughout both Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation territories. These altar locations, we can reach them. Disable them before the comet arrives." 17 sites, Sokka said, studying the diagrams. "Even with White Lotus help, that's too many. We'd need weeks. Or we target the primary node." Zuko's fingers stabbed at one location on the map, the altar in the forest, where this had all begun. "Look, all 17 are connected through resonance patterns. But this one, the first one built, acts as the network's anchor point. Destroy it and the others lose synchronization." Aang traced the energy lines connecting all 17 sites. Zuko was right. The forest altar sat at the center of a web that linked every other device. Cut that connection and the network collapsed. "It won't be undefended," Katara warned. "After Lake Laogai, they'll know we're coming." "Let them know." Aang's voice carried certainty he didn't entirely feel. "We end this, at the altar where Kyle first arrived, where this whole thing started." They planned through the day. White Lotus networks provided intelligence. The forest altar had been reinforced with Fire Nation troops and what remained of Long Feng's Dai Li forces. A small army protecting the keystone that held reality's violation in place. As evening approached, Iroh pulled Aang aside. "You carry heavy burden," the old general observed. "Heavier than when we first met." "Kael's gone because of choices I made," Aang said. "If I'd been faster at Lake Laogai, if I'd seen Long Feng's trap sooner. If. Iroh shook his head. "The universe does not bend to our wishes, young Avatar. Brother Sergeant Kael made his choice. He chose to save lives, to embody the principles he had only begun to understand. Do not dishonor that choice with guilt." "How do I honor it then?" "By finishing what he helped you start. Iroh poured fresh tea. By stopping the altars, by proving that his sacrifice meant something. The words settled into Aang like stones finding bedrock. They departed Ba Sing Se under cover of darkness, riding Appa toward the forest. The sky bison sensed their urgency, flying faster than Aang had ever felt him move. Wind screamed past as they crossed the distance that had taken days on foot. The altar appeared at dawn. It rose from the scorched earth like a monument to hubris, its pylons gleaming in the early light. But the site had transformed since their last visit. Fortifications ringed the structure. Fire Nation soldiers manned watchtowers. Earth-bending barriers formed defensive walls. And at the altar's base, something moved. Aang's heart stopped. A figure in charcoal black armor ceramite, scorched and dented, but intact. One arm hung, useless servo motors sparking. The helmet had cracked, revealing human skin beneath pale scarred, marked with implant ports that spoke of surgical modifications no natural being should possess. Kyle stood guard over the altar he'd been trying to destroy. But his bolter tracked Team Avatar's approach with hostile intent. "Kyle!" Katara shouted as they landed. "You're alive." The Space Marine's helmet turned toward her voice. When he spoke, something was wrong. His words came in mechanical monotone, stripped of the careful consideration they'd learned to recognize. Hostile entities detected, executing security protocols, termination authorized. The bolter fired. Aang's airbending barely deflected the shot in time. The explosive round detonated against Appa's saddle, tearing leather, but missing flesh. He's been compromised. Sokka scrambled for cover. Long Feng's brainwashing, they got him. No, not brainwashing. Aang could see it now, green energy crackling across Kyle's armor, the same wrongness he'd felt when the Dai Li agent had tried to invade his mind. But amplified, weaponized, turned against the one person whose mental conditioning should have been impenetrable. They'd use the altar itself. Dimensional energy focused through the same techniques that broke prisoners' minds. Even Astarte's indoctrination couldn't stand against reality manipulation. Kyle advanced bolter tracking. Fire Nation soldiers fell in behind him, taking courage from their dimensional weapon-given flesh. "We can't fight him," Katara said. "Not after everything. We won't." Aang stepped forward, hands raised in peace. "Kyle, I know you're in there. Fight it. You've spent weeks learning restraint, learning to choose when not to kill. This isn't you." The bolter's targeting reticle painted Aang's chest. One squeeze, and the Avatar would cease to exist. "Remember Lake Laogai." Aang continued walking slowly forward. "You chose duty, chose sacrifice, chose to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's who you are, not this." Kyle's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped. The helmet cracked further, revealing more of the face beneath. Human, yes, but sculpted by surgical modification into something more. Something engineered for war. Yet in those eyes, pale gray, too intense to be natural, Aang saw recognition fighting through corrupted programming. Avatar. The word came distorted, half mechanical, half human. Protocol. Conflict. Cannot resolve. You don't have to resolve it alone. Aang reached out, hand extended. "We're here, all of us. Team, friends, people you saved." The green energy intensified, fighting to maintain control. Kyle's armor servos whined as internal battle played out. Dai Li corruption versus Salamanders conditioning versus something deeper. Something human that had survived centuries of genetic modification, adamation, and psychological indoctrination. The choice to protect, rather than destroy. Kael's bolter lowered. Mission parameters. His voice strengthened, fighting free of the corruption. Protect civilians. Prevent dimensional breach. Stop alter network. The helmet turned toward the structure. Objective unchanged. The green energy shattered. Kael staggered, servo motors screaming as damaged systems tried to compensate. Zuko caught him before he fell, flames wreathing both of them in light that drove back the watching soldiers. Still with us? Sokka asked. Affirmative. Kael straightened, pulling free from Zuko's support. His armor was failing, cracks spreading through ceramite power cells, depleted weapon systems offline. But his voice carried familiar certainty. Alter destruction remains priority. Estimated structural integrity, compromised but functional. Recommendation complete, previous objective. He turned to face the altar. The Fire Nation's soldiers raised weapons, but Kael ignored them. His focus had narrowed to the pylons, the energy matrices, the mathematical impossibility that threatened reality itself. I cannot destroy this alone, he said. But we can, together. Aang understood. The elements? If we hit it simultaneously, earth, water, fire, air, we might disrupt the resonance enough to collapse the network. Affirmative. Probability of success increases to 78% with coordinated elemental strike. Kael's damaged helmet swiveled toward each of them. On my mark. Target primary pylon. Maximum power. No restraint. They positioned themselves around the altar. Fire Nation soldiers charged, but Iroh stepped forward, and suddenly he wasn't a simple tea merchant anymore. He was the dragon of the West Flames, roaring from his hands with heat that made the air itself scream. Soldiers scattered. Now, Kael commanded. Aang drew breath and released a cyclone that tore earth from ground. Katara pulled water from the lake, from the air, from her own blood if necessary, shaping it into a blade of absolute cold. Zuko channeled everything he'd learned about control and purpose into fire that burned white-hot. And Kael, armor-failing systems dying, raised his last weapon. Not his bolter, but his own body, his own mass, his own unbreakable will. They struck as one. The altar screamed. Energy matrices shattered. Pylons cracked. Mathematical formulas carved into metal warped under forces they were never designed to withstand. Reality itself seemed to flex, resisting the violation that had been forced upon it. Then the primary pylon broke. The network collapsed in a cascade of failing resonances. Across Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom territories, 16 other altars lost synchronization. Their carefully calibrated frequencies spiraled into chaos. Some imploded, some exploded. All stopped functioning. The countdown to Sozin's comet became irrelevant. The Fire Nation's dimensional weapon network had been destroyed. Kael fell to his knees, armor finally surrendering to accumulated damage. Aang caught him, barely able to support the weight. Mission accomplished, Kael whispered. His voice faded, power cells dying. Duty fulfilled. You will finish the war. Stop Sozin's comet. Without me. You're not dying, Katara insisted, water already glowing at her hands. Healing can negative, damage, catastrophic, power armor reactor, critical, biological systems, failing. But Kael's face, what they could see through the shattered helmet, held something like peace. Acceptable outcome. Civilians saved. Reality preserved. Purpose achieved. You're more than your purpose, Aang said fiercely. You're Kael. You're our friend. You learned to choose balance over force. Life over mission. Don't leave now. Not leaving. Kael's eyes, those too gray, too intense eyes, met Aang's. Remaining. Here. Anchor for the boundary. To ensure rift stays closed. Aang understood then. Kael wasn't dying. He was choosing. Choosing to become the seal that kept dimensional chaos from returning. To stand eternal watch over the space between worlds. Will we see you again? Katara asked through tears. Unknown. But you will remember. We'll tell stories of Space Marine who learned balance. His hand ceramite gauntlet, barely functional, rose in something like a salute. Honor to serve with you. The light faded from his armor. The systems went dark, but the body remained kneeling at the altar's broken heart ceramite, becoming stone, becoming monument. A guardian against chaos. A warrior who'd found peace. Team Avatar stood in silence as dawn painted the world in colors of hope and loss. Behind them, the war continued. Sozin's comet would still come. The Fire Nation would still threaten the world. But dimensional warfare had ended. Reality would hold. Because a space marine from another universe had learned that some battles were won not through overwhelming force, but through choosing when to fight and when to protect. Thank you, Kael, Aang whispered. The stone figure gave no answer. But somewhere in the space between worlds and the boundary that separated realities, a presence stood guard. Eternal, watchful, at peace, duty fulfilled.